Monsters are real, and they live among us. Pedophilia, cannibalism, and necrophilia? Can anything justify the actions of this bloodthirsty beast? Welcome to yet another video of BLOGGO. In today's video, we uncover the inhuman actions of Jeffrey Dahmer. Was he the bad guy? Before we get into the video, subscribe to this channel and enable the bell icon. Let's get into the video. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, who is also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was an American serial killer and sex offender. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 18 males in a truly horrific way. He was born on May 21, 1960. In West Allis, Wisconsin. His parents were Lionel Herbert Dahmer and Joyce Dahmer. Jeffrey had a pretty normal childhood, though his parents' marriage is said to have been falling apart, and he was often left to himself since they were often busy with work. It has also been claimed that a neighbor molested him. Dahmer grew up increasingly introverted and began spending time at a private animal cemetery he had built himself, filled with roadkill. He started drinking in his teens and became an alcoholic by high school. In 1977, his parents divorced, and he briefly attended Ohio State University before dropping out due to his drinking. He committed his first murder when he was 18 years old. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, just a young man at 18. The two went back to Dahmer's place to drink some beers. Dahmer later said he found his new friend attractive, but when the conversation continued, he realized he wouldn't find love in the guy. When they were both drunk, and the other guy said he wanted to leave, Dahmer went over to a set of weights, picked up a large dumbbell, and hit him. He strangled, stripped and used his body for sexual desires, and dismembered him. Dahmer buried the body but dug it up after a few weeks. He then stripped the bones of their flesh and dissolved what he could in acid. The bones that were left were crushed with a sledgehammer and threw the fragments around a nearby forest. As soon as he turned 19, he enlisted in the American Army. It's reported that he drugged and molested soldiers while stationed in Germany, where he was thrown out later. After that, his drinking continued to cause problems, and his father sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. By 1985 he visited gay bathhouses and bars where he would drug men and rape them. He was arrested twice for indecent exposure incidents in 1982 and 1986. He only faced probation and was not charged for the rapes. Stephen Twomey was his second victim, whom he killed on November 20, 1987. The double murder took place 9 years later than the previous one. Dahmer was residing with his grandmother at that time in West Allis. He encountered a 25-year-old citizen from Ontonagon, Michigan, at a bar and persuaded him to return to a hotel in Milwaukee, where Dahmer had rented a room for the evening. Dahmer claimed that he did not intend to kill Twomey but rather to drug him and explore his body. The following day, Dahmer woke up to find Twomey's beaten dead body lying beneath him on the bed. Blood was flowing from his mouth, and Dahmer's fists and one forearm were bruised. Dahmer stated he had no memory of killing Twomey. He carried the body to his grandmother's residence using a large suitcase. 1 week later, he severed the head, arms, and legs, separated the bones and flesh, and performed many more horrific acts on the body. He disposed of Twomey's remains, excluding the severed head, in the trash. 2 months after the Twomey murder, Dahmer met a 14-year-old Native American male prostitute named James Dockstader. Dahmer lured the youth to his home. At Dahmer's residence, the both of them engaged in sexual activity before Dahmer drugged Dockstader and strangled him. Dahmer left the body in the cellar for almost a week before dismembering it. He placed all of Dockstader's remains in the trash. Next, he boiled and cleansed the skull in bleach. He pulverized the head 2 weeks later. The following homicide occurred on March 24, 1988. Outside a gay bar, Dahmer encountered Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old. Guerrero was enticed to his grandmother's house by Dahmer. Guerrero was drugged and strangled with a leather strap. Dahmer then performed oral sex upon the corpse. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body, disposing of the remains in the trash and retaining the skull before pulverizing it several months later. After 2 months of being convicted of second-degree sexual assault against a 13-year-old boy, Dahmer continued his activities. His next target was an aspiring model, Anthony Sears. Dahmer met him at a gay bar, where he again lured him to his grandmother's basement before drugging and strangling him. He found Sears exceptionally attractive and preserved his head and genitalia. His next victim, Raymond Smith, was a male prostitute and the first person Dahmer murdered in his Oxford apartment in 1990. Dahmer lured him there with an offer of money in exchange for sex before lacing his drink with sleeping pills and strangling him. It was the first time he took Polaroid photos of his victim before dismembering the body. He kept Smith's skull and Sears inside a metal filing cabinet that acted as a shrine. Dahmer continued to lure men from bars or solicited prostitutes to his place, whom he drugged, raped, and strangled. Dahmer also began disturbing acts with their corpses, using the bodies for intercourse, taking photos of the dismemberment process, preserving with scientific methods, putting his victims' skulls and genitals for display, and even retaining parts for consumption. The victims included Edward Smith, whom he killed after luring him to his apartment, Ernest Miller, whom he killed by slashing his carotid artery, David Courtney, Curtis Straughter, Anthony Hughes, Matthew Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, and Oliver Lacey. Two of the victims that stood out were Errol Lindsay and Canaric Synthesamphone. Dahmer met Errol Lindsay on the street, convincing him to come to his home, where he drugged him, but this time was different as Lindsay was the first victim on whom he conducted experiments. Dahmer drilled a hole into Lindsay's skull and poured acid in it. But somehow, Lindsay woke up, but Dahmer drugged him again and strangled him, later dismembering his body. Dahmer lured another victim, 14-year-old Canaric Synthesamphone, to his apartment. He then drilled a hole into his skull. After Dahmer left the condo, Synthesamphone woke up and escaped, crying out for help. Two women outside the apartment saw Synthesamphone and called the police. While interrogating the boy, Dahmer returned and convinced police that the boy was his 19-year-old lover. He claimed Synthesamphone was an alcoholic to justify his present state. The police allowed Dahmer to take the teenager back inside, where he killed him. He dismembered his body and retained his head in the freezer. Dahmer's last victim was Joseph Bredehoft. Dahmer experimented with the men. He used different techniques, such as drilling holes into his skull and injecting acid or boiling water into the brains. The neighbors began complaining about strange noises and awful smells coming from Dahmer's apartment. So you might be wondering how he got caught. Dahmer was caught on July 22, 1991, after he took Tracy Edwards to his apartment to pose for nude photographs. When he entered Dahmer's apartment, he found his apartment very suspicious. During their conversation, Dahmer asked Edwards to turn his head and look at his tropical fish. Dahmer then put a handcuff on his wrist. Though Edwards was confused, he followed him to his bedroom to pose for the nude photographs. Dahmer took out a knife in the room and started to threaten him. Edward convinced Dahmer to return to the living room. He punched Dahmer in the face and escaped through the front door after 5 hours at Dahmer's apartment. Edwards caught the attention of 2 Milwaukee police officers. Edwards asked the officers to free him from the handcuffs, but when the officers failed to free him, Edward accompanied the officers to the apartment. When the officers and Edwards reached the apartment, Dahmer invited the trio inside and acknowledged he had placed the handcuffs upon Edwards. The police inspected the apartment and found out about all his horrific deeds. This is when Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer, was finally caught. Dahmer was arrested on 15 murder charges, and the trial began on January 30, 1992. Dahmer pled insanity in defense due to his disturbing and uncontrollable behavior. After 2 weeks of trial, the court declared him guilty of 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 life terms in prison. During his time in prison, he was attacked twice by fellow inmates. The second attack was very severe. Dahmer was still alive but died from severe head trauma on the way to the hospital. Dahmer's atrocious crimes not only shocked a nation, but his actions have perplexed medical science. He may have been a monster, but Dahmer was also soft-spoken, intelligent, and, as strange as it sounds, he displayed himself as likable. Do you think his medical condition and childhood trauma justify his actions? Comment your thoughts down below. Share, like, and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching. We will join back with another exciting video.